Hi, I'm Marcus, and 3 years ago, I buried my wife on a Tuesday morning while my parents packed their bags and walked out of my life. They didn't even stay for the reception. My mother hugged me once, stiff and cold, then whispered that this was too much for them to handle. My father wouldn't look at me. He just shook his head like I'd disappointed him one final time. They left me standing in a cemetery with 2 3-month-old babies screaming in a double stroller in a future I couldn't see past the next feeding time. But my wife's parents, the in-laws I barely knew, showed up that same evening with suitcases and groceries. They moved into my guest room without asking permission, and they stayed. For 3 years, they raised my boys with me, sacrificed their retirement, gave up their freedom. And then last week, my parents came back. Not to apologize. Not to meet their grandsons. They came because they're dying, both of them, and they need me to pay for the treatment they can't afford. They want my forgiveness, my money, my time. They want me to pretend those 3 years of silence never happened. And the worst part? They have no idea what they missed. What they destroyed. What they're about to find out. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The house smelled like lavender and baby powder when I pulled into the driveway. Same smell for 3 years now. It used to make me nauseous, back when everything reminded me of loss. Now it just smells like home. I sat in the car for a moment longer than necessary, hands still gripping the steering wheel, staring at the porch light Isabel's mother always left on for me. Margaret. She insisted I call her Maggie. Said Margaret made her sound like a librarian, though she'd been a high school chemistry teacher for 30 years before retiring. I could see her shadow moving past the kitchen window. Probably cleaning up after dinner, humming something off-key the way she always did. Gerald, her husband, would be in the living room with the twins, probably building something elaborate out of blocks that the boys would destroy in 3 seconds flat. That was their routine. That was our life now. I grabbed my briefcase and the grocery bag from the passenger seat. Milk, those yogurt pouches the boys liked, and the specific brand of coffee Maggie drank even though she claimed any coffee was fine. It wasn't. I'd learned that the hard way 6 months in when I bought the store brand and watched her take one sip before quietly pouring it down the sink when she thought I wasn't looking. The front door opened before I reached it. Caleb came barreling out, all wild brown curls and scraped knees, crashing into my legs with the force of a small linebacker. Right behind him, slower but just as determined, came Owen. Quieter, more cautious, but his smile was just as wide. "Daddy!" Caleb shouted, even though I'd only been gone since morning. "You're home. Did you bring treats?" I ruffled his hair. "Maybe. Did you listen to Grandma Maggie today?" Owen nodded solemnly, speaking for both of them like he often did. "We helped make cookies. I only ate 2 before dinner." Caleb held up 4 fingers proudly. "I ate this many." From inside, Maggie's voice rang out, warm and teasing. "Caleb James, we agreed on 3. I smiled despite the weight in my chest, despite everything, and followed my boys inside. Gerald was exactly where I expected him, cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by wooden blocks and toy cars. He looked up when I walked in, his reading glasses sliding down his nose. He was 71 but moved like a man 20 years younger. Except for his knees. Those reminded him daily. "How was work?" he asked, pushing himself up with a small grunt. "Long," I said, setting the groceries on the counter. "Same as always." Maggie turned from the sink, drying her hands on a dish towel that had little cartoon chickens on it. The boys picked it out last month at the store, insisted it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. She studied my face the way she always did, reading something I didn't say out loud. "You look tired," she said gently. "More than usual." "I'm fine," I lied. She didn't push. She never did. That was the thing about Maggie and Gerald. They knew when to speak and when to let silence do the work. My own parents never learned that. Every conversation with them had been a performance, volume cranked up, emotions on display like trophies. "Dinner's in the fridge if you're hungry," Maggie said. "Chicken and rice. Your favorite." I wasn't hungry, but I nodded anyway. The boys were already pulling me toward the living room, shouting over each other about the tower they'd built, the cartoon they'd watched, the frog they'd found in the backyard. I let them pull me down onto the couch, let their voices wash over me, let the day finally fall away. Later, after baths and bedtime stories and the third request for water, I finally sat down at the kitchen table. Maggie had made tea without asking. 2 cups. She set one in front of me and took the chair across, wrapping her hands around her own mug. Gerald had gone to bed early, his knees bothering him more than he admitted. The house had settled into that particular kind of quiet that only comes after children finally surrender to sleep. "You got a letter today," Maggie said carefully. I left it on the counter. I didn't move. Didn't look. I already knew. There was only one letter I'd been dreading. "From them?" I asked. She nodded. I didn't reach for it. Didn't want to. Didn't need to. The envelope sat there like something radioactive, glowing with toxicity I couldn't touch. "You don't have to read it tonight," Maggie said. "Or ever, really." But I did. I knew I did. Because ignoring it wouldn't make it disappear. Ignoring them never worked before. I reached over, pulled the envelope toward me. Plain white. My name written in my mother's careful cursive. No return address, but I recognized the postmark. They were still in Oregon, still in that same house I grew up in, the one with the perfect lawn and the wind chimes my mother loved and the constant feeling that nothing I did was ever quite enough. I tore it open. The letter was short. 2 paragraphs. Neat handwriting, no crossed-out words, like she'd drafted it multiple times before committing. "Marcus," it began. Not dear. Not son. Just my name. "Your father and I have been thinking about you. We know it's been a difficult few years, and we're sorry we haven't been in touch. We'd like to see you. And the boys, of course. We think it's time we all moved forward. Please call when you get this." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The second paragraph was worse. "We're going through some health issues right now. Nothing to worry about, but it's made us realize how important family is. We hope you'll consider letting us back into your life. The boys deserve to know their grandparents." I set the letter down. Stared at it. "Read it again." Maggie said nothing. Just sipped her tea. Waited. "Health issues," I said finally. "That's how she's framing it." Maggie raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. "They left," I continued, voice flat. "They walked out the day we buried Isabel. Didn't call. Didn't write. Didn't ask about the boys, not once. And now they're sick, and suddenly they remember I exist." I crumpled the letter in my fist. The anger came fast, surprising me with its heat. I thought I'd processed this. Thought I'd let it go. But holding that letter, reading those words, it all came rushing back. The cemetery. The rain. Isabel's casket being lowered into the ground while I stood there holding 2 infants I didn't know how to keep alive. My mother's face, pale and drawn, telling me she couldn't do this. My father, silent as always, already halfway to the car. And Maggie. Maggie had been standing 10 feet away, holding an umbrella over Gerald's head, watching me fall apart. She didn't cry. Didn't make a scene. She just waited until everyone left, then walked over and took Owen from my arms. "You're coming home with us tonight," she'd said. Not a question. A fact. I didn't argue. Didn't have the strength. I just nodded and followed her to their car. That was 3 years ago. They never left. Now, sitting in the kitchen, I looked at Maggie. Really looked at her. The gray in her hair that hadn't been there when Isabel was alive. The lines around her eyes that deepened when she smiled at the boys. The way her hands trembled slightly when she was tired, though she tried to hide it. "You've given up everything for us," I said quietly. She shook her head. "We've gained 2 grandsons and a son. That's not giving up anything." "But your life," I pressed. "Your plans. You were supposed to travel. See Europe. Gerald always talked about that trip to Scotland." "We'll get there," she said simply. "Or we won't. Either way, we're exactly where we want to be." I didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to hold that kind of love without breaking under the weight of it. "What are you going to do?" Maggie asked, nodding toward the crumpled letter. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to ignore it. Pretend it never came. And the other part? I hesitated. The other part wants to call them. Ask them where the hell they've been. Ask them if they even remember the boys' names. Maggie reached across the table, covered my hand with hers. "Whatever you decide, we're here. We're not going anywhere." I believed her. That was the difference. When Maggie said something, it was true. No conditions. No fine print. I went to bed that night but didn't sleep. Just lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe around me. Caleb's soft snoring from the room next door. The creak of Gerald getting up for water. The hum of the refrigerator downstairs. And I thought about Isabel. Wondered what she'd want me to do. She'd loved my parents once, back when we first got married. Thought they'd come around eventually, that time would soften them. But time just made them harder. When she got sick, really sick, my mother visited twice. Brought flowers. Sat awkwardly in the corner while I held Isabel's hand and pretended everything was going to be fine. My father didn't come at all. Said hospitals made him uncomfortable. Isabel died on a Monday. Quick and cruel, the way cancer sometimes is. One week she was laughing at something stupid on TV, the next she was gone. The boys were 12 weeks old. Too young to remember her. Too young to understand why I couldn't stop crying. My parents had promised to help. Promised they'd be there. My mother had even talked about moving closer, helping with the babies. But when it became real, when Isabel actually died and the babies actually needed constant care, they disappeared. "Too much," my mother had said. "This is all too much, Marcus. We're not young anymore. We can't do this." I'd begged. Actually begged. Told them I needed help. Told them I was drowning. My father just shook his head and walked out. My mother followed. And I'd stood there, in the cemetery parking lot, holding 2 screaming infants, wondering how I was going to survive the next 5 minutes, let alone the next 18 years. Then Maggie and Gerald showed up. They didn't ask if I needed help. They just started helping. Moved in 3 days later with 2 suitcases and a determination that still amazes me. Now my parents wanted back in. Now, when the hard part was mostly over. Now, when the boys slept through the night and could feed themselves and didn't scream for 3 hours straight every evening. Now, when it was convenient. I rolled over, grabbed my phone from the nightstand. 3 in the morning. I pulled up my mother's contact. Hadn't called it in 3 years, but I'd never deleted it. Couldn't bring myself to make it that final. My thumb hovered over the call button. I could do it right now. Wake her up. Demand answers. Demand an apology. Demand something that made sense of the last 3 years. But I didn't. I set the phone down. Rolled back over. Stared at the ceiling some more. Morning came too fast. The boys were up at 6, like always, bouncing into my room with the energy of small tornadoes. Caleb jumped on the bed. Owen climbed up more carefully, settling himself next to my pillow. "Pancakes," Caleb announced. "Grandma Maggie said she'd make pancakes if we let you sleep. But you slept. So pancakes." I smiled despite my exhaustion. All right. Pancakes. Let me get dressed. They raced out, thundering down the stairs loud enough to wake the whole neighborhood. I followed slower, pulling on jeans and a t-shirt, catching my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I looked older than 32. Felt it too. Downstairs, Maggie was already at the stove, flipping pancakes with practiced ease. Gerald sat at the table reading the newspaper, glasses perched on his nose. The boys were setting out plates, arguing quietly about who got to use the syrup first. Normal. Domestic. Home. Morning, Maggie said without turning around. Coffee's ready. I poured myself a cup, sat down next to Gerald. He glanced up from the sports section, gave me a knowing look. Didn't sleep, did you? I shook my head. He folded the newspaper, set it aside. Want to talk about it? Not yet, I said. He nodded, didn't push. That was Gerald's way. Patient. Steady. Everything my own father wasn't. We ate breakfast together, the five of us, the way we did every morning. The boys covered their pancakes in enough syrup to constitute a health hazard. Maggie pretended not to notice. Gerald told a terrible joke that made Caleb laugh so hard milk came out of his nose. Owen just smiled quietly, the way he always did. This was my family now. This was what mattered. But that letter sat in my mind like a splinter, small and sharp and impossible to ignore. After breakfast, after I'd dropped the boys at preschool and made it to the office, I finally called. Didn't plan to. Didn't rehearse what I'd say. Just pulled over into a coffee shop parking lot and dialed before I could talk myself out of it. My mother answered on the third ring. Marcus? Her voice was smaller than I remembered. Thinner. Yeah, I said. It's me. A pause. Long enough to hurt. Thank you for calling, she said finally. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't. Another pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end. Could picture her standing in the kitchen I grew up in, phone pressed to her ear, probably worrying about what to say next. Did you get my letter? She asked. I did. And I don't know what you want me to say, Mom. You left. You both left when I needed you most. And now you're back because you need something from me. That's not fair, she said, voice tight. We were grieving too. We just lost our daughter-in-law. We didn't know how to help. So you didn't try, I said. You just left. Walked away from your own grandchildren. We thought you needed space. I needed help. I shouted, then immediately regretted it. A woman walking past my car glanced over, concerned. I lowered my voice. I needed my parents. I needed someone to tell me I wasn't going to screw up those babies. I needed someone to hold them while I fell apart. And you left me there. Both of you. She was crying now. I could hear it in her breathing. We made a mistake, she whispered. We know that now. We want to fix it. You can't, I said flatly. You can't fix 3 years of nothing. You can't fix the nights I sat up alone wondering how I'd make it to morning. You can't fix the first time Caleb said Grandma and he meant Maggie, not you. Who's Maggie? She asked, confused. Isabel's mother, I said. The woman who actually showed up. The woman who moved into my house and gave up her life to help raise your grandchildren because you couldn't be bothered. Silence. Long and terrible. We're sick, Marcus, she said finally. Your father and I. It's serious. I know, I said. You mentioned that in the letter. We don't have much time, she continued. Maybe a year. Maybe less. We want to see the boys. We want them to know us before it's too late. My hands were shaking. I gripped the steering wheel with my free hand, tried to steady myself. You don't get to do this, I said. You don't get to walk back in because you're dying and suddenly decide family matters. You had 3 years. 3 years to call. To visit. To send a birthday card. You did nothing. I know, she whispered. I know. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't change anything, I said. But it's a start, she pleaded. Please, Marcus. Let us meet them. Let us try. I closed my eyes. Thought about the boys. About their bright faces, their easy laughter, their uncomplicated love. Thought about how confused they'd be meeting grandparents who'd never existed in their world before. I need time, I said finally. I need to think about this. How much time? She asked. I don't know. I'll call you when I'm ready. Marcus, please don't. I hung up. Sat there in the parking lot, phone still in my hand, heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't know what the right answer was. Didn't know if there even was one. All I knew was that my parents had made their choice 3 years ago. And now they wanted me to pretend it never happened. Wanted me to let them back in like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I'd changed. The boys had a life now, a good one, filled with people who actually showed up. People who didn't disappear when things got hard. I started the car, pulled out of the parking lot, and drove to work. But I couldn't focus. Couldn't concentrate on emails or meetings or anything that wasn't that phone call echoing in my head. At lunch, I called Maggie. She answered immediately. Everything okay? I told her about the call. About what my mother had said. About the guilt I felt, the anger, the confusion. She listened without interrupting, the way she always did. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. What do you want to do? She asked finally. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to tell them to go to hell. But another part feels like I'm being cruel. Like I'm keeping the boys from their grandparents out of spite. Marcus, Maggie said gently, you're not keeping anyone from anyone. Your parents made a choice. They chose not to be in those boys' lives. That's on them, not you. But they're dying, I said. Doesn't that change things? Does it? She asked. If they weren't dying, would they have reached out? I didn't have an answer for that. You don't owe them anything, Maggie continued. Not forgiveness. Not access to your children. Not a second chance they didn't earn. But if you want to give them one, that's your choice. Just make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. What are the right reasons? I asked. That's something only you can answer, she said. But whatever you decide, Gerald and I support you. We're not going anywhere. There it was again. That steady, unwavering certainty. The promise that had held me together for 3 years. Thank you, I said, throat tight. For everything. Always, she said simply, and hung up. I sat in my car for another 10 minutes, staring out at the parking lot, watching people come and go with their normal lives and their normal problems. And I thought about what normal meant now. What family meant. What forgiveness required. And I still didn't have an answer. That evening, I picked up the boys from preschool. They came running out, backpacks bouncing, faces covered in paint and pure joy. Caleb had made a picture of a dinosaur. Owen had painted the sky purple because he liked purple better than blue. We drove home with them chattering in the back seat, telling me about their day in overlapping sentences I could barely follow. And I thought about my parents, about what they'd missed. Every drawing. Every story. Every small moment that made up a life. They'd chosen to miss all of it. And now they wanted to show up for the ending. At home, Maggie had dinner ready. Spaghetti, the boys' favorite. We ate together, all of us, talking and laughing and existing in this space we'd built from grief and necessity and unexpected love. After dinner, after the boys were in bed, I sat Gerald and Maggie down in the living room. Told them I'd made a decision. I'm going to let them visit, I said. Once. Just once. Let them meet the boys. And then we'll see. Maggie nodded slowly. You're sure? No, I admitted. but I think I have to try. For the boys. So they don't grow up wondering. So they know I gave them the chance to have grandparents, even if those grandparents didn't deserve it. Gerald leaned forward, hands clasped between his knees. We'll be here the whole time, he said. Whatever you need. I know, I said. And that's why I can do this. Because I know you're not going anywhere. Maggie reached over, squeezed my hand. You're a good father, Marcus. Isabel would be proud. Those words settled something in me I didn't know was unsettled. Because I'd spent 3 years wondering if I was enough. If I was doing this right. If my boys would grow up okay despite everything they've lost. But looking around this living room, at these two people who'd sacrificed everything for children who weren't biologically theirs, I realized we were more than okay. We were a family. A strange, patched together, unconventional family. But a real one. And whatever happened with my parents, that wouldn't change. I called my mother back that night. Told her she could come. One visit. No promises beyond that. She cried. Thanked me over and over. Promised they'd be good, that they wouldn't cause trouble, that they just wanted a chance. I didn't tell her I didn't believe her. Didn't tell her I was doing this more for my own peace of mind than for hers. Just gave her a date 2 weeks out and hung up. 2 weeks to prepare. 2 weeks to figure out how to introduce my children to grandparents who were strangers. 2 weeks to steel myself for whatever came next. Because I knew, deep in my gut, that this visit wouldn't go the way my mother hoped. Couldn't. Too much time had passed. Too much damage had been done. But I'd give them their chance. And then I'd close that door for good, if I had to. On my terms this time. Not theirs. The boys deserved that much. And so did I. The 2 weeks passed faster than I wanted them to. Each day brought me closer to a confrontation I wasn't ready for, no matter how much I prepared. I tried to explain to the boys who was coming, but how do you introduce the concept of grandparents who've been absent their entire lives? Caleb listened with wide eyes, nodding like he understood, but I could tell he was just mimicking comprehension. Owen stayed quiet, watching my face for clues about how he should feel. Grandma Maggie and Grandpa Gerald are your real grandparents, I told them one night during bath time. These other people, they're my parents. But they live far away and you haven't met them before. Why not? Caleb asked, smashing a rubber duck against the side of the tub. Because sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, I said carefully. And they're trying to fix one now. Owen looked up at me, water dripping from his hair. Are they nice? That question hit me harder than it should have. I didn't know how to answer honestly without poisoning the well before they even arrived. So I took the coward's way out. You'll have to decide that for yourself, I said. Maggie was in the kitchen when I came downstairs after putting the boys to bed. She was wiping down counters that were already clean, a nervous habit I'd noticed over the years. Gerald sat at the table pretending to read the newspaper, but I could see his eyes weren't moving across the lines. You don't have to be here when they come, I said. I know this is awkward. Maggie stopped wiping, turned to face me. We're not leaving you alone for this. It's not your responsibility, I started, but Gerald cut me off. Those boys are our grandsons, he said firmly, setting down the paper. We were there from the beginning. We're not hiding in the background now because your parents finally decided to show up. We'll be polite, but we're staying. There was a hardness in his voice I rarely heard. Gerald was the gentlest man I'd ever known, patient and soft-spoken. But there was steel underneath when it mattered. I'd seen it before, in small moments. The way he'd stood between me and an aggressive neighbor once. The way he'd talked down a doctor who'd been dismissive of Caleb's ear infection. Gerald didn't fight unless he had to, but when he didn't back down. Thank you, I said, meaning it for more than just this. For everything. Maggie came over, put her hand on my shoulder. We're family, Marcus. That's what family does. The day arrived gray and cold, one of those October mornings where the sky looks like it's deciding whether to rain or just threaten all day. My parents were driving up from Oregon, a 6-hour trip they'd started before dawn. They'd arrive around noon, stay for a few hours, then drive to a hotel in town. I'd made it clear they weren't staying in the house. That boundary, at least, I could hold. I spent the morning cleaning things that didn't need cleaning. Vacuuming carpets, reorganizing books on shelves, checking and rechecking the refrigerator like I was expecting a health inspection. Maggie watched me with quiet concern but didn't tell me to stop. She understood the need to control something, anything, when everything else felt like chaos. The boys sensed the tension. They were quieter than usual, playing in the living room without their typical volume. Even Caleb, who rarely met a silence he couldn't fill, kept glancing at me like he was checking if I was okay. At 11:45, a car pulled into the driveway. I watched from the window as my parents climbed out. My father moved slowly, favoring his left side. My mother looked smaller than I remembered, thinner, her hair fully gray now. They stood by the car for a moment, looking at the house like they were gathering courage. I opened the door before they could knock. Didn't want them to feel too welcome, too comfortable. This was my territory now, my home, and they were guests. Unwelcome ones at that. "Marcus," my mother said, her voice catching. "You look well." I didn't return the compliment. She didn't look well. She looked sick, hollowed out, like something was eating her from the inside. My father stood behind her, hands in his pockets, eyes on the ground. He'd aged badly. The man I remembered had been tall and imposing, shoulders back, voice always a little too loud. This man looked defeated. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. They entered slowly, taking in the house with quick, darting glances. I saw my mother's eyes land on the photos covering the walls. The boys at 6 months, 1 year, 2 years. Birthday parties and Halloween costumes and ordinary Tuesday afternoons. 3 years of life documented in frames they'd never seen. From the kitchen, Maggie appeared, wiping her hands on a towel. Gerald followed, standing just behind her. The air in the room changed immediately, tension thickening like humidity before a storm. "This is Margaret and Gerald," I said. "Isabel's parents. They live here with us." My mother's face did something complicated. Surprise, maybe jealousy, definitely discomfort. She extended her hand. "It's nice to meet you," she said, voice strained. Maggie shook her hand, polite but cool. "We've heard a lot about you." The words hung there, sharp and pointed. My father cleared his throat. "Where are the boys?" he asked, the first words he'd spoken. "Playing," I said. "I wanted to talk to you first. Set some ground rules." My mother opened her mouth to protest, but I kept going. "You're here to meet them, not to make promises you can't keep. You're not their grandparents, not yet. You're visitors. If they don't warm up to you, we're not forcing it. If they get overwhelmed, you leave. This is on their terms, not yours." My father's jaw tightened. "We're their grandparents whether you like it or not." "Biologically," I said. "But biology doesn't mean much when you've been absent their entire lives. Maggie and Gerald are the grandparents who matter. You're just people they're meeting for the first time." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "Please don't punish us by keeping them away." "I'm not punishing anyone," I said, voice hard. "I'm protecting my kids. There's a difference." Before anyone could respond, Caleb came racing around the corner, Owen trailing behind. They stopped when they saw strangers in the house, Caleb pressing against my leg, Owen hiding halfway behind the wall. "Boys," I said gently, kneeling down. "These are my parents. Your other grandparents. They came to meet you." Caleb peered around my leg, curious but cautious. Owen didn't move. My mother made a small sound, something between a sob and a gasp. She took a step forward, then stopped when Owen flinched back. "They're beautiful," she whispered. "They look just like Isabel." "Owen looks like Isabel," I corrected. Caleb looks like me. My father was staring at them with an expression I couldn't read. Not quite longing, not quite regret. Something else. Something that looked like fear. Can we sit? My mother asked. Maybe talk to them? I nodded toward the living room. The boys followed me, still weary. Maggie and Gerald took chairs near the window, close enough to intervene but far enough to give space. My parents sat on the couch, perched on the edge like they might need to run. For several long minutes, nobody spoke. Caleb climbed into my lap. Owen sat on the floor by my feet, leaning against my leg. My mother tried first. I'm Gloria, she said softly. And this is your grandpa Robert. We've wanted to meet you for so long. Why? Caleb asked, blunt in the way only children can be. Gloria faltered. Because we're family. We already have grandparents, Caleb said, pointing at Maggie and Gerald. They live here. I saw the words hit my mother like a physical blow. She glanced at me, then back at the boys. Yes, but you can have more than 2 grandparents, she tried. Some kids have lots. Owen spoke up, his voice quiet but clear. Did you know our mom? The question hung in the air. My father looked down at his hands. Gloria's face crumpled. Yes, she said. We did. She was wonderful. Then why didn't you come before? Owen asked. When she died. I closed my eyes, grateful and devastated all at once. My son, 3 years old, asking the question I'd never had the courage to ask so directly. Gloria looked at me, desperate. I don't think this is appropriate to discuss with children. They asked, I said flatly. You can answer or not. But I'm not lying to them to make you comfortable. Robert stood abruptly. This was a mistake. We shouldn't have come. Sit down, I said, surprised by the command in my own voice. You wanted this meeting. You're going to finish it. He sat, but his hands were shaking. Gloria was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face. We were scared, she said finally, looking at the boys. When your mommy died, and you were so little, we didn't know how to help. We made a bad choice. We left when we should have stayed. Why were you scared? Caleb asked. Because taking care of babies is hard, Gloria said. And we were old and tired and we thought your daddy would be better off without us. But he needed help, Owen said, matter of fact. Grandma Maggie told us. She said Daddy was very sad and needed family. Maggie hadn't moved, but I saw her hand tighten on the arm of her chair. Gerald's jaw was set, his eyes fixed on my parents. You're right, Gloria said to Owen. He did need help. And we should have given it. We made a terrible mistake. And now you're sick, Caleb said. It wasn't a question. My parents both looked at me, shocked. I shrugged. They're smart kids. They hear things. Robert leaned forward, trying to engage. What do you boys like to do? Do you play sports? I like dinosaurs, Caleb said. And painting. Grandpa Gerald taught me how to make paper airplanes that fly really far. That's wonderful, Robert said, voice strained. I used to make paper airplanes with your daddy when he was little. No you didn't, I said quietly. You told me it was a waste of paper. Robert's face flushed. I don't remember that. I do, I said. I remember a lot of things. The visit deteriorated from there. My parents tried to engage the boys, asking questions that got one-word answers. They offered to read a book, but Caleb said he wanted Grandma Maggie to read it instead. They suggested going outside to play, but Owen said he didn't want to. After an hour, Gloria started crying again. She excused herself to the bathroom. I heard the water running, covering the sound of her breakdown. Robert sat on the couch looking lost, hands folded in his lap, not meeting anyone's eyes. The boys got bored and wandered off to their room. Maggie followed them, leaving me and Gerald with Robert in an awful silence. Finally, Robert spoke. They hate us. They don't know you, I said. There's a difference. Whose fault is that? Gerald asked, voice mild but sharp. Robert looked at him. I know we failed. You don't have to rub it in. I'm not rubbing anything in, Gerald said. I'm stating facts. Those boys are 3 years old and they've never met you. That's not an accident. That's a choice you made. We were grieving, Robert said weakly. So was Marcus, Gerald shot back. So were we. Everyone in that cemetery was grieving. But some of us stayed and some of us left. You don't get credit for showing up 3 years late. Robert opened his mouth to argue, but Gloria returned, eyes red and swollen. She looked at me with something like pleading. Can we try again? She asked. Come back another day? Spend more time with them? I don't think that's a good idea, I said. Please, Marcus. Don't shut us out completely. We're trying. Trying now, I said. Where was the trying when they were 6 months old and screaming every night? Where was the trying when they got sick and I didn't sleep for 4 days straight? Where was the trying on their first birthday, their second, their third? Gloria had no answer. Neither did Robert. I think you should go, I said finally. They stood slowly, gathering their coats, moving toward the door like condemned prisoners walking to execution. At the threshold, Gloria turned back. We're not giving up, she said. We'll keep trying. That's your choice, I said. But understand something. Those boys don't need you. They have grandparents who love them, who show up every single day. You're not filling a hole. You're just making things complicated. We want to be part of their lives, Robert said, finding his voice. Then you should have been part of their lives from the beginning, I said. You don't get to opt in now that the hard part is over. I closed the door before they could respond. Stood there with my forehead pressed against the wood, breathing hard, feeling like I'd just run a marathon. Gerald appeared beside me, put a hand on my shoulder. You did the right thing. Did I? I asked. Or did I just deprive my kids of family out of spite? Those aren't their family, Gerald said firmly. We are. Family doesn't abandon you when things get hard. Family shows up. Family stays. I nodded, but the doubt was there, worming its way into my thoughts. What if the boys grew up resenting me for keeping their biological grandparents away? What if I was making the same mistakes my parents made, just in reverse? Maggie came down the stairs, the boys trailing behind her. They seemed unbothered by the visit, already back to their normal selves. Can we have snacks? Caleb asked. Sure, I said, grateful for the normalcy. Let's get snacks. We sat around the kitchen table, the 4 of us and Maggie and Gerald, eating crackers and cheese like nothing had happened. Like the last hour hadn't been an emotional minefield. Like we were just a family having an ordinary afternoon. And maybe that was the point. Maybe that was what mattered. Not the drama, not the history, not the biological connections. Just this. This table, these people, this moment. Later that night, after the boys were asleep, I sat in the living room with Maggie and Gerald. We didn't talk about the visit at first. Just sat there, drinking tea, letting the quiet settle over us like a blanket. Finally, Maggie spoke. They'll be back. I know, I said. Are you going to let them? Gerald asked. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to slam the door and never open it again. But another part wonders if I'm being cruel. If I'm letting my anger hurt my kids. Your anger is protecting your kids, Maggie said. There's a difference. Is there? I asked. Because right now it just feels like I'm keeping score. Like I'm punishing them for leaving by not letting them back in. Marcus, Gerald said, leaning forward. Let me ask you something. If they hadn't gotten sick, do you think they would have reached out? I thought about it. Really thought about it. No, I said finally. I don't think they would have. Then this isn't about making amends, Gerald said. This is about easing their guilt before they die. And that's not your responsibility. But what about the boys? I asked. Don't they deserve the chance to know their grandparents? They know their grandparents, Maggie said gently, gesturing to herself and Gerald. They have people who love them unconditionally. Adding more people who might disappoint them isn't doing them any favors. I wanted to believe that. Wanted to feel certain in my decision. But the truth was messier than that. Because I knew what it was like to grow up with parents who were physically present but emotionally absent. And I'd spent years wondering if I was the problem, if I'd somehow failed to earn their love. I didn't want my boys to feel that way. Didn't want them to spend their lives wondering why they weren't enough. So maybe keeping Gloria and Robert at a distance was the kinder choice. Maybe protecting my kids from disappointment was more important than giving them access to people who'd already proven they couldn't be trusted. Or maybe I was just rationalizing. Using logic to justify what was really just hurt and anger and 3 years of accumulated resentment. I didn't have the answer. Not that night. Maybe not ever. All I knew was that when I went upstairs and checked on the boys, seeing them curled up in their beds, faces soft with sleep, I felt that fierce protective instinct that had carried me through the darkest days after Isabel died. These were my children. My responsibility. My world. And I'd do whatever it took to keep them safe, even if that meant keeping them away from people who shared their blood but not their history. Even if that made me the bad guy in someone else's story. Because in my story, in our story, we were doing just fine without them. The next morning brought an email. I saw it while drinking coffee, still groggy, the boys eating cereal at the table with Maggie supervising. The subject line was simple, please read. I almost deleted it without opening. Almost. But something made me click. It was from Gloria. A long, rambling message about regret and fear and all the ways they'd failed. She talked about Isabel's death like it had happened to them, like they were the primary victims. She mentioned their health issues again, the cancer spreading through Robert's liver, the treatments that weren't working. She begged for another chance. Used the word dying 3 times in 2 paragraphs. At the end, she wrote something that made my hands shake. We know we can't undo the past. But we're asking for the future, however short it might be. The boys deserve to know where they come from. They deserve to know their father's side of the family. Please don't let your anger rob them of that. I set the phone down hard enough that Maggie looked over. Everything all right? She's trying to guilt me, I said. Making it about what the boys deserve, not about what she and Robert want. Is she wrong? Maggie asked carefully. Yes, I said immediately. Then, less certainly, I don't know. Maybe. I pushed back from the table, went outside to the back porch. The morning air was cold, biting, exactly what I needed to clear my head. The truth was, Gloria had hit a nerve. Because I did wonder if I was depriving my kids of something. Not the grandparents they deserved, but the knowledge of where they came from. Their history. Their full story, not just the edited version I was comfortable telling. But then I thought about the visit. About how uncomfortable the boys had been. About Caleb saying they already had grandparents, about Owen asking why Gloria hadn't come when Isabel died. About the way my parents had sat there, wanting connection but not knowing how to create it, expecting the boys to just accept them because of biology. That wasn't enough. It would never be enough. My phone buzzed. Another message, this time from Robert. Shorter, more direct. Your mother is dying faster than they told us. 6 months, maybe less. I'm asking you, as your father, to let us know our grandsons before it's too late. You can hate us. That's fair. But don't let them miss this. I stared at those words. As your father. Like that title meant something. Like he'd earned it through years of presence and support and love. Like he could just invoke it now and expect me to fall in line. I typed a response, deleted it. Typed another, deleted that too. Finally, I wrote something simple. I'll think about it. That was all I could promise. All I was willing to give. Inside, the boys had finished breakfast. Caleb wanted to go to the park. Owen wanted to stay home and build with blocks. We compromised, did both, the way we always did. Found the middle ground where everyone got something they wanted. At the park, I pushed them on the swings while Maggie sat on a bench reading. Other parents were there, other kids running and screaming and living their uncomplicated lives. I wondered if any of them dealt with things like this. Probably. Everyone had their own private wars. "Daddy, higher!" Caleb shouted, pumping his legs. I pushed harder, watched him arc up toward the sky, heard his laughter cut through the morning air. This, I thought. This is what matters. Not the emails. Not the guilt. Not the dying grandparents who wanted redemption they hadn't earned. Just this. Just my boys, laughing and safe and loved. Everything else was noise. That afternoon, while the boys napped, I sat down with my laptop and did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I looked up support groups for widowed parents. Found forums where people talked about raising kids alone, about setting boundaries with toxic family members, about choosing peace over obligation. I read for hours. Stories that mirrored mine, stories that were worse, stories that ended better and stories that ended in estrangement and regret. One post stuck with me. A woman whose parents had abandoned her after her husband died, then came back when her kids were teenagers. She'd let them in, slowly, carefully, with strict boundaries. It hadn't been perfect. There'd been setbacks and arguments and moments where she questioned everything. But her kids had gotten to know their grandparents, and when those grandparents eventually died, there was closure. Complicated, messy closure, but closure nonetheless. Another post told a different story. A man who'd let his abusive parents back into his life for his kids' sake, only to watch them repeat the same patterns with his children that they'd inflicted on him. He'd cut them off again, but the damage was done. His kids had seen the toxicity, experienced it firsthand, and now he was dealing with the aftermath. Both possibilities existed. Both outcomes were real. The question was, which risk was I willing to take? I closed the laptop, went to the window. Watched the street, the trees losing their leaves, the world moving forward like it always did, indifferent to my small domestic crisis. Maggie appeared beside me, 2 cups of tea in her hands. She offered me one. "You've been thinking hard all day," she observed. "Trying to figure out the right answer," I said. "Maybe there isn't one," she said. "Maybe there's just the answer you can live with." "That's not helpful," I said, but I smiled a little. She shrugged. "I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to support whatever you decide." "What would you do?" I asked. "If you were me?" Maggie was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I'd ask myself one question. Will I regret this more if I let them in or if I keep them out? And whichever answer comes first, whichever one sits heavier in my gut, that's the one I'd trust." I thought about that. Really thought about it. If I let them in and they hurt the boys, I'd never forgive myself. But if I kept them out and the boys grew up feeling like they'd missed something, like I'd stolen a choice from them, that would haunt me too. But one of those scenarios I could control. One of them I could mitigate, manage, stop if it went wrong. The other was a gamble. A hope that this time, somehow, my parents would be different. And I'd spent too many years hoping for that to believe it now. "I'll let them visit again," I said slowly. "But on my terms. Supervised. Limited time. And the second they overstep, the second they make the boys uncomfortable, it's over. No second chances after that." Maggie nodded. "That sounds reasonable." "Does it?" I asked. "Because it doesn't feel reasonable. It feels exhausting." "Most reasonable things do," she said. That night, I wrote back to both my parents. Laid out the terms. They could visit once a month. 2 hours maximum. Always with me and Maggie and Gerald present. No promises about the future, no expectations beyond the immediate visit. And if they pushed, if they tried to guilt-trip the boys or me, if they made anyone uncomfortable, the arrangement ended immediately. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The response came within minutes. Gloria's message was effusive, grateful, full of promises to respect boundaries and be good and make up for lost time. Robert's was shorter. Thank you. We won't disappoint you. I wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe this time would be different, that facing death had changed them somehow, made them capable of the love and presence they'd never managed before. But belief was a luxury I couldn't afford. So instead, I'd watch. I'd protect. I'd give them the chance they were asking for, not because they deserved it, but because my boys deserved to know I'd tried. And if it failed, at least I'd know I'd done everything I could. At least I'd know the door closed because they couldn't walk through it, not because I'd locked it out of spite. That was the best I could offer. The most generous version of myself I could manage. It would have to be enough. The second visit happened 3 weeks later. Gloria and Robert arrived exactly on time, carrying wrapped presents that immediately made me tense. I'd told them no gifts, that showing up was enough. But here they were, holding brightly colored packages like they could buy their way into my children's hearts. The boys were cautious again, hiding behind Maggie when the door opened. Gloria's face fell when she saw their reaction, but she plastered on a smile that looked painful. "We brought you something," she said, kneeling down with effort. "Would you like to see?" Caleb looked at me for permission. I nodded, even though everything in me wanted to refuse. Owen stayed where he was, arms wrapped around Maggie's leg. Inside the packages were toys. Generic ones, the kind you grab at a big box store when you don't actually know the child you're buying for. A plastic truck for Caleb, a stuffed bear for Owen. The boys accepted them politely, mumbled thank you, then set them aside without a second glance. Gloria looked crushed. Robert just stood there, hands empty now, looking lost. The visit followed the same pattern as the first. Awkward questions met with short answers. Attempts at connection that landed flat. My parents trying too hard and the boys responding with the brutal honesty only children possess. At one point, Robert asked Caleb what he wanted to be when he grew up. "A paleontologist," Caleb said proudly. "That's a dinosaur scientist." "That's wonderful," Robert said. "I bet you're very smart." "Grandpa Gerald says I'm smart," Caleb agreed. "He helps me read dinosaur books." The comparison hung in the air, unintended but cutting. Robert's jaw tightened. Gloria looked at her hands. After an hour, Gloria asked if she could take the boys outside, just for a few minutes. I said no. She started to argue, caught herself, nodded. The boundaries held, even if they chafed. When they left, Gloria hugged me at the door. I stood stiff, arms at my sides, not returning it. She pulled back, eyes wet. "Thank you," she whispered. "For giving us this chance." I said nothing. Closed the door and felt the relief wash over me like cold water. That became our routine. Once a month, Gloria and Robert would drive up. 2 hours of stilted conversation and forced cheer. The boys tolerated it, nothing more. They never asked when their other grandparents were coming back. Never mentioned them between visits. It was like Gloria and Robert existed in a separate pocket of reality that only opened once every 30 days. On the fourth visit, things shifted. Gloria looked worse, her skin gray, her movements slower. She'd lost weight she didn't have to lose. Robert helped her to the couch, his touch gentle in a way I'd never seen him be with anyone. The boys noticed. Even at 3, they understood something was wrong. "Are you sick?" Owen asked, direct as always. Gloria tried to smile. "A little bit, sweetie. But I'm okay." "You don't look okay," Caleb said. "You look really tired." "I am tired," Gloria admitted. "But being here with you makes me feel better." It was the most honest thing she'd said to them. And something in the boys responded to it. They sat closer than usual. Caleb showed her his latest drawing, a detailed dinosaur scene he'd spent days on. Owen brought over a book and asked if she'd read it. Gloria cried while reading, tears sliding down her face, but her voice stayed steady. The boys leaned against her shoulders, one on each side, and for the first time, they looked like a real family instead of strangers performing roles. I watched from the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, throat tight. Maggie stood beside me. "She's dying," Maggie said quietly. "I know. Does that change anything?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Should it?" Maggie didn't answer. We both knew there was no right response to that question. After that visit, the boys started asking about Gloria and Robert between visits. Not often, but enough to notice. Caleb wanted to know if they'd like his new dinosaur book. Owen asked if we could send them a picture he'd drawn. They were forming attachments. Small ones, fragile ones, but real nonetheless. And I didn't know how to feel about it. Relief that my sons had capacity for compassion? Fear that they'd get hurt when Gloria died? Anger that my parents were worming their way in after all? All of it. None of it. Everything at once. The fifth visit, Gloria couldn't get out of the car. Robert came to the door alone, his face haggard. "She wants to see them," he said. "Just for a minute. She's in too much pain to walk." I looked back at Maggie. She nodded. We brought the boys outside. Gloria was in the passenger seat, reclined, looking so small and frail she barely seemed real. But when she saw the boys, her whole face lit up. "Hi, my sweet boys," she said, voice barely above a whisper. They climbed into the car carefully, one on each side of her. Caleb held her hand. Owen rested his head on her shoulder. And they just sat there, the three of them, not talking, just being together. I stood outside watching, Robert beside me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "I know we don't deserve this. Any of this. But thank you." "I'm not doing this for you," I said. "I'm doing it for them." "I know," Robert said. "And that makes you a better father than I ever was." The admission shocked me into silence. I turned to look at him. Really look at him. He was crying, quietly, tears tracking down his weathered face. "I failed you," he continued. "Your whole life, I failed you. I was too hard, too distant, too wrapped up in my own disappointments to see what I had. And when you needed me most, I ran. We both did." He wiped his eyes roughly. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to believe me. But I need you to know that my greatest regret, the thing that haunts me every single day, is that I wasn't there for you. And now I'm watching those boys love you the way you deserve to be loved, and it's killing me that I missed my chance." I didn't know what to say. All the anger I'd carried, all the hurt and resentment, it was still there. But it felt different now. Softer around the edges. Not gone, never gone, but less sharp. "You're right," I said finally. "You did fail me. And you can't fix that now. It's too late." Robert nodded, accepting it. "I know. But," I continued, surprising myself, "you're not failing them. Right now, in this moment, you're showing up. That's more than you gave me, and I'll give you credit for that. Not much, but something." "It's enough," Robert said. "More than I expected." We stood there, two men who'd never understood each other, connected only by blood and shared failure, watching my sons comfort his dying wife. And in that strange, painful moment, I felt something shift. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. But maybe the beginning of acceptance. Gloria died 3 weeks later. Robert called me at 2 in the morning, his voice hollow. She'd been in hospice, slipping away slowly, then all at once. She'd asked for the boys in her last hours, asked if they knew she loved them. "They know," I'd told her during our last visit. "They know." The funeral was small. Just family. The boys wore matching button-down shirts that Maggie had ironed the night before. They held my hands walking into the church, Owen on my left, Caleb on my right. Robert looked like he'd aged a decade in 3 weeks. But when he saw us, something in his face softened. "You came," he said. "Of course," I said. The boys wanted to say goodbye. We sat in the front row, the 5 of us. Me, the boys, Maggie, and Gerald. Robert sat alone on the other side of the aisle, and after a moment's hesitation, I stood up. Walked over. Sat down beside him. He looked at me, surprised. "You shouldn't have to do this alone," I said quietly. His hand found mine. Squeezed once. "Thank you." The service was simple. A few people spoke about Gloria, about her kindness, her strength, her quiet dignity. No one mentioned her failures as a mother or grandmother. Death has a way of smoothing over the rough edges, leaving only the parts we want to remember. When it was over, the boys approached the casket. Caleb placed his dinosaur drawing beside the flowers. Owen set down a small painted rock he'd made in preschool. They stood there for a moment, hands clasped, saying their own private goodbyes. I watched them, these beautiful, compassionate children who'd learned to love someone who'd come into their lives far too late. And I felt proud. Proud of their capacity for grace, their willingness to open their hearts despite having every reason to protect them. They were better than me. Better than all of us. After the burial, Robert pulled me aside. "I'm moving," he said. "Closer to you and the boys. If that's all right." I thought about it. About monthly visits turning into weekly dinners. About Robert becoming a real presence in my sons' lives. About letting go of the anger I'd held for so long. "Yeah," I said. "That's all right." His relief was visible. "I'll find a place nearby. Nothing fancy. Just somewhere I can see them grow up." "We have a garage apartment," I said before I could stop myself. "It's small, but it's empty. If you want it." Robert stared at me. "Are you sure?" "No," I admitted. "But the boys like you. And they've already lost too many people. So if you're serious about staying, about being present, then we'll make it work." "I'm serious," Robert said. "I promise you, Marcus. I'm not leaving again." Time would tell if he meant it. But for now, I chose to believe him. Chose to let him try. 3 months later, Robert moved into the garage apartment. It was strange at first, having him so close after years of distance. But he kept his word. He showed up for dinner most nights. He learned the boys' routines, their favorite foods, their bedtime rituals. He read them stories in the evening, his voice gruff but warm. He built block towers and pushed swings and sat through endless dinosaur documentaries without complaint. He became Grandpa Robert. Not a replacement for Gerald, never that. But something real in his own right. One evening, after the boys were in bed, Robert and I sat on the back porch. The air was cool, autumn settling in again, a full year since Gloria's death. "She'd be happy," Robert said. "Seeing us like this. Seeing the boys loved and safe." "She would have liked to see it herself," I said. Robert nodded. "I know. I have a lot of regrets about how we handled things. But I'm grateful for what we have now." "Me too," I said. And I meant it. We sat in comfortable silence, something that would have been impossible a year ago. And I thought about the journey we'd taken. About the anger and hurt and all the ways we'd failed each other. About Gloria's death and the unexpected grace it had forced us to find. About my boys, growing up surrounded by love, even if that love came from imperfect people with complicated histories. This wasn't the family I'd imagined when Isabel and I talked about our future. But it was real. It was mine. It was enough. Inside, I could hear Maggie laughing at something Gerald said. The boys were quiet, finally asleep after their bath. The house felt full in the best way. And for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. Not forgiveness, not entirely. The past couldn't be erased, and some wounds would never fully heal. But acceptance. Understanding. A willingness to move forward instead of staying frozen in old pain. My parents had failed me. That was true and unchangeable. But they were trying now. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all any of us could do. Try, fail, try again. Keep showing up even when it was hard, even when we didn't know if it would matter. The boys would grow up knowing their whole story. The good parts and the complicated parts. The grandparents who stayed and the grandparents who left but came back. They'd learn that people were messy and imperfect and capable of both terrible mistakes and unexpected redemption. They'd learn that family wasn't just about biology. It was about choice. About who showed up. About who stayed when staying was the hardest thing to do. And they'd know, always, that they were loved. Fiercely, completely, by people who'd fight through their own failures to give them the life they deserved. That was the gift I could give them. Not perfection. Not a fairy tale. But truth. Real, complicated, beautiful truth. And maybe, in the end, that was the best inheritance of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.